Y'all ready for that DLC? We have got a really big show lined up for you today. We are going to be talking about the PlayStation 5 reveal, just a little bit, and my thoughts on it kind of as an outsider or a Nintendo fan. We're going to talk about what my favorite color is, thanks to of wife questions. We're going to see what happens when you put the unstoppable force that is One Punch Man and put it up against the genius and resourcefulness that is Iron Man or Tony Stark. And then we have got a big ol' review of Pokémon Sword and Shield. We're going to do that this week because originally I wanted to wait a little bit longer, wait till at least the next episode that was originally slotted to be video game themed. But it just so happens that the DLC, or the first part of the DLC, Isle of Armor, releases on the same day as this podcast. So it seemed too perfect to pass up. I really want to take that opportunity to talk about it this week rather than later so we could be topical. So with all that out of the way, I think it's time to get straight into some news. So for this week's news, we've got quite a big reveal. We've got the reveal of the PlayStation 5. Now, those of you who know me know that the main video game systems that I'm going to play are going to be Nintendo, but it's still a pretty big deal for the PlayStation 5 to be revealed, so I thought it would be silly to not talk about it. I think the design is absolutely stunning. I know that this design has been kind of divisive, polarizing, I suppose. Some people love it, some people hate it. I absolutely love it. I think it's sleek. I think it has a cool color design. It's reminiscent of Stormtroopers, and I think that it kind of gives it a futuristic look. I think that PlayStation, especially in comparison or as opposed to Xbox, always knocks it completely out of the park when it comes to console design, and I think they did it again. The game reveals that they came out, the one, in fact, I'm only going to talk about the one. I'd originally thought about talking about two, but the main one that I want to talk about is the Miles Morales edition to the Spider-Man game. Now, I don't fully understand this. I've been told it's kind of like a DLC, but I've also been told it's a little bit more than a DLC to the Spider-Man game that we already have, which is a shame. I wish it were just a straight-up new game. It's very timely with all the things that are going on with Black Lives Matter and awareness for minorities and fighting against police brutality, to celebrate a character like that and bring even more attention to him than maybe we've had in recent years. But especially after he was already popularized by Into the Spider-Verse. So it's a shame that it's not a full game, but it's still really, really cool that it's happening. The Spider-Man game on PlayStation 4 is, without a doubt, probably my number one biggest wish I could play that, as being a person who mostly buys Nintendo consoles. But that's awesome. I think that was a big, heavy hitter, and I think they were smart to reveal it. It's just a shame that it's not a whole other game. As far as the specs, I feel bad. I asked a friend of mine to actually write down all of the specs, and then I was going to try to talk about them a little bit more in depth. But after I thought about it, I thought it was sufficient to just say it's a very, very big jump. But that makes me wonder what the cost will be like as well. I know that typically these PlayStation and Xbox consoles will go down in price over time, and I get that. But I feel like they're going to have a hard time selling it, especially with the lack of production they're probably going to have early on if it goes any higher than $500. And that's for the higher end one. And I've heard that it could go high. I've heard that the reason that neither Xbox or PlayStation want to say what the price is because they know it's high and they know people aren't going to like it. And I've also heard that they're kind of playing chicken with each other, determining who is going to reveal what first, so that way the other one can come in and be, the savior, as it were, and make their costs lower. But I just hope that it's reasonable. If people want the works when it comes to the specs on video games, they can build a computer. You need to have something more affordable than a computer if you want it to be a viable alternative for most people. So here's hoping. Fingers crossed. I don't know why, because I'm probably not going to buy one, and I was going to talk about why. So you guys know that that's my main bread and butter. I have come to a point now, especially because of the Switch, that I'm playing video games a lot more than I was. So I thought about buying one of these consoles, but the thing about it is that I decided a few years ago that I've basically reached the point in my adulthood and my responsibility that I can't buy something just because it's new and it's shiny. Because I've bought new consoles in the past, and then they have just sat collecting dust. And I don't want that to happen again. And I know for a fact that there are very few games that I will just absolutely have to play, quote unquote, or want to play on PlayStation or Xbox that aren't on Switch. Usually it's like 2 to 5 games, plus more that I'd be interested in, but there's so many Switch games that I'm also just interested in that there's no reason getting another console and just increasing that ocean of different options, as it were, if I'm never going to work through all the options that I have. And past that, while I am playing more video games now, so I'm more likely to play it than I would be otherwise, I also haven't touched Kingdom Hearts 1.5 or 2.5 on the PlayStation 3 that I bought like 5 years ago. I still haven't touched those. And I don't want that to happen again. And I know that the portability factor of the Switch is the reason I'm able to play it so much. And I do play it both in docked mode and handheld mode. I definitely do. But having the option to go back and forth between each makes me more willing to invest in games than if I know that the only way I'm going to play through this game is if I just have the TV the whole time and I'm hogging it from my wife. So I probably won't get it. But hey, PlayStation 5, that's huge news. I wanted to talk about it. Maybe I'll break down and be irresponsible and buy it, but I'm going to try not to. So with that out of the way, I believe we are good to go ahead and go on to the main part of this show. A big old fat review of Pokémon Sword and Shield for the Nintendo Switch. All right, and now time to start the main review. I've got a lot to unpack here. I do have notes, but those of you who don't know me, what you should know is that Pokemon is my favorite franchise of all time. For that matter, and for that reason, I'm going to be biased when I review these games because there are some people who just flat out hate these games. I love them. However, some people say, well, why don't you just guard against bias then by like thinking about how other people would like it or do this or do that? And I get that sentiment. I really do. But I think at a certain point, if all you're doing is sharing your opinion, then your bias is valid. And I'm going to talk about like how some people don't like this, but I do. But I also just have to be completely open. That being said, because I am naturally going to love all of these games, I am also going to be reviewing not just Pokemon Sword and Shield as a game, but Pokemon Sword and Shield as a Pokemon game specifically. And I think that I am a pretty good expert as far as experts go to review this game. I'll put it this way, while there are plenty of people who have played way more Pokemon than me, there is no series that I am more authorized in to give a breakdown of than the Pokemon series. I could be mistaken, but I am pretty sure it is the only game series that I have played the main entry of every single game. The only one I have not finished is Let's Go, and I've played halfway through that one. So I think I kind of know what I'm talking about, if that makes sense. So we're going to get right into it, and I'm just going to address the big elephant in the room right away. Guys, we got to talk about Dexit. So if you don't know, Dexit is short for Pokédex Exit. It's a play or a joke on Brexit. Every Pokemon game since Generation 3, Or I guess Generation 4, to be fair. Generation 3 is the only one before now where you've not been able to have every single Pokemon that has ever existed in your game. And in Generation 3, you could have them. It was basically just next to impossible is the only thing, because you had to get them from both console games as well as the mainline portable games. But since Generation 4 onward, you've always been able to transfer your Pokemon up from the previous games to keep your favorites going forever and ever. And that's still true. You haven't lost the ability to keep your favorite Pokemon. However, some of them won't be able to enter Sword and Shield. They'll have to just kind of chill out for a little bit. And what used to be the Pokemon Bank will now usually be Pokemon Bank's the old one. What's the new one? Pokemon Home. For Generation 6 and 7, they had a feature called Pokemon Bank that you could keep your Pokemon stored in. Now it's called Pokemon Home. Those Pokemon that you have from Ruby, Sapphire, or any game afterwards, they will still stay in Pokemon Home, and they can be used on future games, but there are some of them that you cannot put into Pokemon Sword and Shield. This was a huge thing for a lot of people, and I think that it blew up way bigger than it had to. For a lot of people, being able to have all of your Pokemon in the same game was a huge thing. And people made jokes, oh, it's always been you got to catch them all, which you still do catch them all, just all of them in that game. And the Pokemon that you don't catch in that game, you weren't catching again anyway. You were just transferring them up from before. But that's neither here nor there. When I originally woke up to the news that not all of the Pokemon would be able to be brought over to Pokemon Sword and Shield, I was kind of upset. But the more I thought about it, I was like, this doesn't really affect me directly because I don't have all the Pokemon anyway, and I don't use all of my old Pokemon. I do try to save some of the rarer ones just in case I ever want to use them, but they really just kind of sit there collecting dust with me going, someday I'll do that. But the more I thought about it, the more I got on board with it. They explained why. They gave two reasons. They gave more time to focus on development, getting high quality animations or graphics or polished art design. We'll talk about that one later. And the other one being so they could focus more on the meta of the game, which we will also talk about later if those hold up. Overall, do I think that Game Freak's reasoning for taking this feature out of the game holds up? It's hard to say, because on one hand, I don't really know if one of the areas they kind of indicated towards is really justifiable when you look at the quality of what they ended up producing. But on the other hand, I get what they're saying. I should probably talk about that when it gets to that. But overall, I think that it does hold up, but I also think it was a fabricated answer to go ahead and say out loud to people, so that way they would have a reason for it, because what I believe to be the main reason probably just wouldn't have sat as well with people. But maybe it would have sat better, because the reasons they gave certainly did not sit well in the long run. I think that it's one of those things where the Pokédex is ever expanding, and you're getting more and more new Pokemon every single generation. And you just weren't going to be able to have all 6,000 Pokemon in Generation 32 or whatever the thing was. You just weren't. It just wasn't going to happen. And I'm not even talking about from a standpoint of can it fit on the card or is it too much time to develop or any of the stuff like that. It's too many Pokemon to be in a balanced game, which I think gives away how I feel about one of them, that I think it might have been a good answer. Do I think that cutoff point had to be now necessarily? I don't know. And that's the part that kind of bummed me out the most, because what was supposed to be the first big mainline game for Pokemon, or at least mainline new generation for Pokemon on a home console, theoretically, potentially the greatest Pokemon game ever, now had one of the biggest features taken away and was having a lot of negative press. But I do think it had to have been done eventually, and I think this was as good a time as any. Maybe I would have pushed it off one more generation. And I know there's going to be people who disagree with that. There's going to be people who say, no, they could have gotten to 20 million Pokemon and had all of them in every single game, just forever, indefinitely. But I disagree. I think that it's too much. It's too crowded, especially for new players. It's just unrealistic. And no other game has enemies or characters indefinitely included in the series for all time, forever and ever. Smash Brothers, Ultimate aside, has been known to take characters in and out. So I think it's unfair to hold Pokemon to that standard just because they have up until this point, especially considering the fact that they are still creating services outside of the game that allow you to keep your old favorites, which is a feature that is very unique to Pokemon and very important to Pokemon, I feel like. And I feel like that's still not lost because they're still on home and they're still going to be in future games. And as we know from the DLC, a lot of them are going to be able to come into Pokemon later on. But that's all I'll say on Dexit for now. To summarize, I'm super bummed out, and I was super bummed out at first, but I believe it to be a necessary evil. As far as the actual game, I feel like the pacing is overall pretty great as far as the story goes, but I think the story does speed up a bit more towards the end than I would like. I don't really have too much to say about that. I do think that the difficulty level was satisfactory. Pokemon games are notoriously easy. They're always going to be easy. So when I look for difficulty in a Pokemon game, I'm not asking, is this an overall challenging experience? I am asking, was there enough challenge that I had to think about the decisions that I was making, and I felt like what I clicked mattered in some form or fashion? And I feel like, at least compared to some other Pokemon games, this one hit that mark for me. Overall, it was kind of button mashy, go through it, especially when you look at how the newer games have been. They've all been, Generation 6 onward, have all been very button mashy and go through it, and that's kind of what you expect. However, there were a few battles that caused me to be taken aback and have to think about the decisions I was making. Most notably, Nessa. I had to face Nessa twice, which I think is just happenstance. I've heard some people say the same about Kabu, who I had no problem with. And then the champion battle, which is arguably the most important battle in the entire game, while I did not lose, was incredibly difficult compared to other battles in the game and definitely made me think about what decisions I was making, and was a huge level jump from the battles right beforehand, and I was not expecting that. And I had a lot of fun with that championship battle, and it truly felt like a championship battle when you think, especially when you consider how Leon was the unbeatable champion, which we'll talk about when we get to the story element of the review. So I thought it was a satisfactory difficulty level. As far as the meta goes, the competitive scene, I've heard that it's fantastic, but I don't have a lot of personal experience. I just have a little bit. I will say that I like, and this goes back to when I talk about too many Pokemon being in the game, and they said that one of their reasons was they wanted to have a more balanced meta. Everything I have heard from people who take part in competitive, for all intents and purposes, they say that it's balanced, that it works out. I've even heard that with the different Pokemon being featured in Gigantamax raids, they've been rotating which Pokemon you can and can't use in each season. Just a little bit, but rotating nonetheless. And I think that will continue when you see the DLCs drop, both today, if you're listening to this at the day that it launches, and sometime later on in the fall. I think that that's going to change up the meta a little bit as well, and I like that because I think that with an online competitive system and an ongoing seasons of battle, I think it's good to change things up from season to season because it gives people a reason and incentive to keep changing their teams. And I think that's good for the people who are into competitive. So from what I've heard, the meta is great. I know for some people it's not their favorite, but I don't think I've heard anyone say that the meta for this game is bad. I would say that the main consensus is that Gen 5 or Gen 6 may still be the best, but is certainly better than Gen 7. But once again, that's from somebody who is mostly not competitive, just barely dabbled in it. As far as the main new features, the wild area, the max raid battles, the Gigantamax and the Dynamax. When I first saw Dynamax, I thought it was super dumb. And I still think it's kind of dumb in the sense that it's like Mega Evolution, except they don't change. And they're just, oh, here's a really big Pokemon. But I think the lore is satisfactory to justify it. And I think mechanically it makes a lot more sense than Mega Evolution because any Pokemon can do Dynamax, so it's not limited to one person. It's limited to 3 turns, which makes you have to think about when you're going to use your Dynamax. And you still have the alternate forms through Gigantamax. Though I definitely think it would have made a lot more sense if those 2 names were flip-flopped, because the one that makes you big should be Gigantamax, right? And the one that changes your appearance should have a more specialized name, right? That's neither here nor there. I think that Dynamax was a good feature. It is amazing to be able to walk around the wild area with a completely controllable 3D camera. I do wish there was more to do in the wild area in terms of exploration, meeting unknown characters or new characters that you didn't know before, because I feel like the wild area had this misconception of being like a miniaturized Skyrim or Breath of the Wild, where it's this vast area to explore. And it is a fair size, and I will give it that. And it is pretty gorgeous outside some of the trees, which we'll talk about later, and some of the texture patterns. However, overall, there's just not a lot to do. There's the max raid battles, and that does give you a lot to do in terms of online going, but there's not a variety of things to do, I guess is what I'm getting at. But it was a good step in the right direction for future games, and I hope that as they implement that more, it will help with map design in future games. And my only other complaint is that there's so much to catch and train in the wild area for post-game. For some people, that was a huge plus, and I do like that the wild area gives you reason to keep coming back, almost in like a mobile game fashion with the featured raids and different things like that. But by the same token, when I was completing the Pokédex, I found myself thinking that the rest of the map was obsolete, and that made me really sad because I didn't want this game to just be the wild area now. I want a reason to go back to the other cities as well. So that was whatever. I'm trying to think if there's anything else with the wild area to talk about. The only other thing is that I think that max raid battles are a fun way to look for Pokemon with hidden ability. And Gigantamax Pokemon, which can only be found, at least right now, until the day this podcast drops, through max raid battles. And I think that helps a lot with the quality of life. Speaking of quality of life, I don't want to dwell too much on this because you guys either know or you don't care, I feel like. But I'll kind of breeze over this. There are lots of good quality of life features in this game. Some new, some not new, but collectively I think they work together to be better than ever to make getting into competitive a little bit more accessible. You've got the experience candies, which are new, and they are fantastic. I hated those at first. I love them now because I don't have to use them if I don't want to use them. And it is so much better taking these candies from these max raid battles that I need to do anyway to collect different things and are fun to do because they're social, and just be able to completely level up a Pokemon like that to where I need them to be. Rather than have to breed the Pokemon I want and then go through the Elite Four over and over and over again with experience share on. It's just whatever. Which I could talk about the experience share. Actually, I'll talk about that in a second. Being able to see IVs, I understand that was added last generation where you can just see them all in your computer rather than having to talk to somebody who's like, this stat is pretty good, but this stat can't be beat. That was obnoxious as all get out. So glad that's gone. Nature mints are new. That's a cool way to change a nature on Pokemon that maybe you've already formed a relationship with through the main adventure and kind of have a sentimental attachment to. Bottle caps, those are not new, but they help you max out the IVs for a stat that maybe you don't have perfect, especially which are great for shiny Pokemon especially, but also Pokemon that you played with before you had finished the game. So on and so forth. There's a lot of those quality of life features. I think that they've done about all they can do. The only thing that I would say is that some of the shortcuts that they have implemented could still be fine tweaked, but they don't really need to introduce shortcuts in any other areas, I feel like. As far as online, can we get the sleekness of the Ycom combined with the effectiveness of the PSS from Generation 6? Because the Festival Plaza in Gen 7 was just dumb. I know there's supposedly a lot to do there. I didn't do any of that stuff, but I just didn't want to have to go into this specialized area just to play online. The Ycom is always right there. It's easy to access, but it's really difficult in terms of finding things that you want to do, and more difficult than it should be. Like, why? I was going to say, why is it not a GTS? Probably because they wanted you to use it on Pokemon Home, which does have a global trade station. But like Max Raid Dens especially, why does this page only refresh indiscriminately at random intervals? And why do I have to just select something from the screen to find something? Why can I not just be like, this is the Pokemon I want, this is the type of star raid I want to find, are there any available, search for it. And while still having the other option available, I just feel like the Ycom was such a good step in the right direction that it's really a shame that they missed the mark in certain areas. And then after that, man, I promise we are almost done with gameplay. Told you this is going to be a big old fat review. After that, the routes. Okay. So it has not been since Generation 5, I feel like, that we had a map design in a Pokemon game that made me feel like I was actually exploring the area. They've basically been railroaded. Straight shot, this direction, go. Not just in like the map design, or not just in the route design, but also like in the map design in terms of like most of these being like a perfect circle. Generation 7 was kind of here and there, but it was almost, for these little clumps of land, it sure felt like I could only access small areas because it was just like a loopy track around it. I will come up with a better way to describe that when I review Sun and Moon. But I'm not reviewing Sun and Moon right now. I'm reviewing Sword and Shield. I feel like this game, in comparison to some of the recent games, didn't feel too linear, especially since there were two periods where you had to go explore the wild area as your route, and that helped. And you did do a little bit of back and forth, going back to different cities, so it didn't feel like you were just going straight up the map. And the routes they did have reason to go a little bit forward and a little bit back, which helped a little bit. But by and large, the routes themselves were still linear and a straight shot, and that's just a shame. Because exploration and puzzle solving, which there is like none of in modern Pokemon, is the main thing that makes a Pokemon adventure great. And I get they focus more on competitive in recent years, but they've made the stories better. Just make the routes better too. Game Freak, you can make a 3D game that involves exploration and puzzle solving. It's okay. So a step in the right direction, but still kind of misses the mark. I'm gonna skip this one. Oh no, this is the last one. Okay, this is the last thing on gameplay, and then we'll move on to the next section. The last thing on gameplay is the level scaling, which is absolutely perfect in every way. The level scaling is phenomenal. I never felt like I was over leveled, and I never felt like I had to grind, and that is amazing. I was able to just play the game and enjoy it without worrying about that crap, which is fantastic. And if I did catch a new Pokemon and it wasn't up to par with the Pokemon I currently had, I could just give it experience candy until it was where I wanted it to be and just keep on playing. grinding is an outdated concept in video games now. There's no reason for it. That is not fun. Defeating the same Pokemon in the wild over and over again is not difficulty. It's just tedious. And this game, better than any Pokemon game that came before it, just lets me play the game without feeling like I am over-leveled or under-leveled, and I love that. When they first, I said I was going to bring this up again. When they first introduced the fact that you couldn't turn off the experience share, I was kind of upset about it. And I still am, simply for the sense that having the option is better than not having the option. But they certainly made it to where if this feature is going to be turned on all the time, you better believe that it's not going to make the game too easy or make you over-leveled or anything like that. So, perfect. Love it. Overall, I know that I had a lot of areas like where, well, this could be improved, and this was a good step in the right direction, and there's only really one thing that I thought was absolutely perfect that got me super excited, at least. But overall, despite its problems, and this goes back to the bias I was talking about, I've just got to give it a 5 still, because I have put more hours into this Pokemon game than I have any Pokemon game since Generation 3. And that is in part due to the fact that I'm playing more games now than I was then, but it's also due to the fact that the gameplay is just fun. It's good gameplay for a good game. And for all the reasons I just mentioned, all the steps in the right direction, the thing it comes down to most is that Pokemon is already a winning formula that I will always love. And the only area out of all those things that I really nitpicked and critiqued and broke down that I wish could use some great improvement that would really take this over the top that are important to me is I wish that the maps weren't so linear, and I wish there's more exploration and puzzle solving. But never have I ever played... That's a game too. Never have I ever played a Pokemon game where I had such a great balance of difficulty, not being over or under leveled, while not even having to worry about how many wild Pokemon I was facing, or if I was facing wild Pokemon, or grinding, or turning experience share off. Just play the game. Never have I ever played a Pokemon game where I could just play the game and still experience a fair amount of challenge, enough to where I just have to think about what I'm doing, which is all I ask from this children's game, from point A to point B. The only thing out of all those things that I nitpicked and broke down that I really, really wish they would fix is I want more exploration and puzzle solving. But nonetheless, it's a winning formula. The very formula that Pokemon's gameplay is based off of is just a winning one that they have refined and tweaked over time as far as the meta is concerned. So despite its flaws, I still love it, because the part that makes it great really makes it great, and it just always has and always will. And I don't think I would give a 5 to every single Pokemon game's gameplay, but the level scaling and pacing is what really takes it over the top. So we're going to go with a 5 for that. So let me see here. Next thing before our break, we're going to talk about replay value. This is pretty short, pretty self-explanatory. This is a 5 right out the gate. Basically, every Pokemon game is a 5 for replay value, save for maybe the first couple generations, because there are infinite things to do. You have Nuzlocke, you have competitive, you have shiny hunting, you can complete the Pokédex, you can collect, in this game, you can collect all the Gigantamax Pokemon. There are other challenge runs besides Nuzlocke that you can do, or you can restart the game just for funsies. There are a million different ways to reach 1,000,000 hours in these games, and that's always for Pokemon. So that's another 5, and you can hate me if you want to hate me, but I like what I like, and I feel like I have reasons for what I like. Maybe you don't agree, maybe you do, but I think that through everything I just explained, you understand that I don't love this just for the sake of loving it. Though I'm sure the nostalgia factor helps too. With that out of the way, we are going to go ahead and take a break. See, notice how gameplay was like 20 minutes, and I got through replay value in like less than a minute. We're going to take a break. We're going to do wife questions, and we've got a pretty simple one this week, but one that should be fun. All right, so for this week's wife questions, I actually got the wife to join me. Would the wife like to ask her question?
I'm not the wife. I'm your wife.
My wife. Would my wife like to ask the question herself, or do I just read it myself off of the phone here?
Hello, my name is Minnie Mouse. My question is, what is your favorite color and why? And you have to do 2 sentences or more.
Okay, here we go. So, my favorite color is black. I think that black is a very sleek color. I think it is a very modern looking color, and it is also very slimming. Another thing I like about black is that it appeals to my inner middle school edgelord that will always be a part of me. I don't have to wear skulls on my shirts anymore, but I like the black. There's just something familiar about it. Is that sufficient, Minnie Mouse?
You can call me Mrs. Mouse. Thank you for your time.
All right, so that was this week's wife question, and now on to the second part of the review. All right, so now we're going to move on to the second largest part of the review, but not nearly as long as I talked about gameplay, I promise, which is the story. So I want to start with a positive on this one. I think I started with the most positive, or I ended with the most positive when I was talking about gameplay. I'm going to start with the most positive when I talk about story. And that is that I think that this game has some of the best characters collectively, like as a unit, of the entire Pokemon franchise as far as like the games are concerned. So Hop, Bede, and Sonia all have really great character arcs where they start in one position, they grow and they learn and they change and they react like actual humans, and by the end of it they've accomplished some sort of growth or realize something new about themselves or come to the next best version of themselves, I guess you could say. I don't really want to talk too much in depth about it because I want to remain relatively spoiler free, but suffice to say, at least for Hop and Bede, that Hop is one of the better rivals throughout the entire series. The only one that's coming to mind right now that is definitely better is Blue. There are a few other ones that could be contenders, but I almost would put Hop right after Blue because so there's this misconception that I feel like that in order to be a good rival in Pokemon, you have to be a jerk just because the first 2 were jerks and they're remembered so fondly. But I don't think that that's true. I did miss having the quote-unquote jerk rival, and I was really, really happy to see Bede kind of fill that role. But you don't have to be a jerk to be a good rival. You just have to have some sort of character development, some sort of motivation, because most of the friendly rivals are all the same, right? They just want to be your buddy, and they're giving you free stuff every step of the way, and they are just following you around everywhere you go. I'm like, oh, shucks, I lost. Oh, well. What's really nice about Hop, in addition to how he grows as a character, is his... Give me 1 second here. I'm letting my wife take her book back that I was using as a prop. One of the things that I really like about Hop is that when he loses, it actually affects him. And he changes and he grows from that. He cares. Because they're not a rival if when you beat them they say, aw, shucks, oh well. Like, they don't even care. So that's one thing I really liked about Hop. This is not a spoiler. This was in the trailer. The fact that he is the champion's little brother is also a very nice wrinkle to that story. Bede, as far as his character arc, I don't have too much to say, but I just appreciated the fact that a jerk rival was back. I love the fact that this game has involvement of the gym leaders, and all of the gym leaders are very distinct and have characteristics that make them stand out and make them memorable. I feel like the further we've gotten into Pokemon as a franchise, the less and less that we've had memorable gym leaders that actually stand out, especially like Gen 6 and really Gens 4 through 6, which I suppose are the later gens because Generation 7 does not have gym leaders. But I just struggle to remember most of them. The ones I did remember I either didn't like or they didn't really leave much of an impression on me. That is not the case here. All of the gym leaders are really well designed. They all have distinct characteristics that kind of set them apart from the other ones, and very similar to Generation 5. That's probably unfair of me to lump Generation 5 in with 4 and 6 as far as not memorable gym leaders go. But just like Generation 5, the gym leaders are actually involved in the story. And I thought that was really cool. And then, of course, you have Leon, the unbeatable champion, who is played up to be this amazing, amazing figure who you have to beat. And it seems like an insurmountable task. And then, as we already talked about in the gameplay, when you finally do face him, for the most part, I'm sure some people had less trouble with him than other ones, but the battle actually lives up to the hype. And that's awesome. The characters in this game are probably my second favorite thing about the game overall, like across all the categories. Team Yell as the quote-unquote villain, they're okay. I feel like it's safe to say, without it being too spoilery at this point, if you're listening to a review, that the actual villains they're welcome as the villains, and I prefer them over Team Yell, but the story had some poor execution, which we'll talk about here in a second. I guess it's actually right here. So I've got some notes this week. We'll see if it makes it any better or worse. You should give me feedback if you have any. But the pacing of the game, I like really well up until the very end. So there's a lot of people that complain that the story doesn't build enough over time. But to me, it did seem like while you didn't know who the real bad guy was up until the very end, even though you could kind of telegraph it, to me, it did seem like they were building on the lore behind the Darkest Day and the lore behind the two heroes that protected and saved Galar. And you're learning a little bit more and more of this with Sonya every step of the way. And I appreciated that as well. And to me, it did not seem like they weren't building that story. It just kind of felt like it at the end because you didn't know who the villains were before then. Not completely. However, the ending is when everything becomes a jumbled mess. I said I was trying to avoid spoilers. Also, it's been a while since I played it. But my problem with the ending is not that it's all packed in at the end. I mean, I'd prefer if it weren't, but I'm okay with it. My problem with the ending is that I could make very little sense of what was going on or why. And it seemed like there are just a couple of lines of dialogue they could have tweaked to make it at least cohesive. And that's all I need out of a Pokemon game. Just make it cohesive and believable. The stories have been better since Generation 5, but they can be better than they are still. I'm trying to think about how the ending goes. So you're in Winden. Winden, right? Yeah, Winden. No, it's not Winden. You're in Winden, and Piers walks up to you, and he's just like... Or no, you're waiting to go to dinner with Leon, who's an adult and Hop's older brother. And you're just like, Leon's taking too long. I think something is up. And then they just go chasing for him, breaking into the base of all these people they've trusted so much up to this point on a whim. I should have re-explored it before I came to this to kind of break it down better, but it just didn't make sense. And there's just a few lines of dialogue they could have tweaked to really make that work. So I wasn't a fan of that. Overall, I think this is the first section that I'm going to go for. I liked it. I didn't love it. Honestly, with Pokemon games and the story, I'm pretty easy to please. And the characters made it so great that it's just a shame that something that seemed so overlooked and so easily fixable made this game kind of a jumbled mess at the end. And because of that, I can't go to 5. I gotta stick with 4. Which brings us to our last one, which is... So I've changed this. Before it was graphics, I have actually changed this to art design, because this is going to encompass both how pretty the game looks. I talked about last week about how I I don't really care about raw graphical power. I just want it to look nice. But I've also added music rather than giving it its own separate category. So this is going to involve both the music and how the game looks collectively.
Are you gonna sing?
Am I going to sing? No, I'm not going to sing. Sorry. So let's go ahead and talk about it. It's probably the number one thing people think about when they think about the graphics of this game. Let's talk about Treegate. Game Freak said that the reason they were not going to include all the Pokemon is so they could focus on high quality animations and graphics. And of course, the one picture that went around over and over again was the low textured tree in the wild area. And you start to think, well, that's probably just one tree, right? Or maybe that's just a bad picture. No, that's all of them in the wild area. They all look that bad. And there are general texturing issues throughout most ground areas of the game. But that aside, regardless of maybe what it could have been or this, that, and the other, I've told you graphics aren't the main thing I look at when I think about games. I think that besides that, which did look objectively ugly, I think the game looked really, really nice. And I never had any problems with it until other people started complaining about it, which made me nitpick it. And I still think it looks much, much better than Generation 7. Anybody who says it still looks like a 3DS game is out of their minds. I do think the animations could have been better, but by the same token, I don't really give a crap about the animations, like, at all. Sometimes I even turn them off. The Pokemon could look more fluid or lifelike, I suppose, but, I mean, there's always room for improvement. Overall, when I was looking at the aesthetic of this game, outside of some of the texture areas on the grasses, and specifically those trees in the wild area, I thought it was pretty, which is all I can really ask. As far as the music, though, the music, which I will not sing because, one, that would be awkward, and two, I can't remember it. The music in this game is amazing. Best music in any Pokemon game, bar none. I love the way in the gym battles, the cheers go along with like the beat and the melody of the music. The Slumbering Weald is probably the best music in any Pokemon game. And while I can't remember all of them right now, there's a lot of other really good bangers all throughout the game. Part of the reason I decided to include music as part of art design is because for most games, I'm probably not going to have a lot to say about music because I play most games with the volume off. But because of how special Pokemon is to me and because of how much it means to me, and because this was the first game on a home console, I kind of wanted to experience the whole thing. So I played this one mostly with the volume on, and I'm so glad I did because the music was just an absolute delight.
Can you sing it for us?
No, I can't remember how it goes.
Obviously, it was very delightful.
I haven't played that game with the volume on since like November. Maybe December.
So can we get it next week?
Get what next week?
Some music from Mitchell.
I mean, if that's your wife question, I guess I can't really... Okay, she says that's going to be the wife question. Oh, man, I never wanted to say my name on this podcast. I never wanted to say any name for me at all. That was going to be part of my gimmick.
I mean, Mickey Mouse.
No, I don't want to be Mickey Mouse. That's fine. It's not that big of a deal. I never said my name, so that can still be the gimmick. The main thing is I wanted to see if anybody ever noticed, and now they definitely will.
Maybe they didn't hear me.
Yeah, maybe they're not listening right now. Maybe they're like cleaning out their ears or something.
That seems weird.
That's fine. Okay, so maybe I'll sing the Slumbering Weald next week, and that'll be incredibly awkward and probably make everyone turn off the podcast.
No,
But-
turn it up louder.
But it's all good. They'll turn it up louder. All right, so that's all for the review. The music is so good that it brings up the art design to a 5, is what I was going to get at. So that's all for the review. Give me just a second. I'm going to calculate the overall score. Okay, so the overall score for Pokémon Sword and Shield, Generation 8 of Pokemon, is going to be a whopping 4.75. So that is it for the review this week. We're going to move on now to our Who Would Win. So for this week's Who Would Win, we have One Punch Man versus Iron Man. The submissions were made on a status I posted on Facebook. So I actually don't know One Punch Man's actual name. I know the person who nominated him did include his name, but I don't remember what it is because I've never watched that show. Obviously, I know Iron Man is Tony Stark. I've got 3 posters of Iron Man sitting in front of me right now. So this is really what it comes down to, right? Same as last week when we had Shazam. One Punch Man is invulnerable, and Tony Stark is just a guy. Now, that being said, Tony Stark is a very, very smart guy. Tony Stark is a man that, with the help of others, was able to defeat Thanos. Tony Stark is the type of guy that has ingenuity, creativity, and could potentially come up with a way to really take down One Punch Man, theoretically. And everything in my heart of hearts wants him to win. And I hate that the week that he got recommended is against another Superman clone. But, I mean, how can you get around the invulnerability of One Punch Man? He's supposed to basically be invincible. You'd have to have a power that is equal to invincible. Especially when you consider, because I've never watched One Punch Man, but I know this, that the gimmick of the show is that because he did his 100 push-ups, 100 chin-ups, whatever all the exercises are every day, he became so powerful that nothing is a challenge for him, and he can beat basically anyone he's ever faced without breaking a sweat, so he's just really bored all the time. So when the whole gimmick of your character is that he wins so much that even he's sick of it, I just think it would be impossible to think that Iron Man could beat him, no matter how much I would want him to. Maybe his creativity and intelligence could make it a much closer fight than I thought it would be, and I can imagine that, but I haven't watched the show enough of One Punch Man to know that, but I think it's got to go to One Punch Man. So that is all for this week. A big thanks to Jay DeGarrow on YouTube. That's JayDegarrow, for providing us with our royalty-free theme music. I do want to encourage you guys, please keep the conversation going. Post on our Facebook wall, comment on the YouTube video, tweet me at Podfreak using the hashtag Podfreak. I started this podcast as a way to just kind of air my thoughts and what was the word I used last week? Go back and listen to it if you haven't already. A way to express myself, I guess. That's not it. But I started this podcast for that reason, but I also started because I wanted to communicate. I wanted to build a community and start conversations. And when you guys, I don't really care if you tweet, share, donate to our imaginary Patreon. I just want what we talk about on this podcast to go into social media so that I know people are listening, that they care, and I also want to hear what you have to say. Yes, Nikki. Minnie Mouse.
How can I donate to a Patreon that doesn't exist?
That's the joke.
Oh.
Yeah. So as part of that, also be sure to hit me up in either of those places, any of those places, Facebook, YouTube, or Twitter, to make a suggestion for who would win. I try to take it from people who listen to the podcast and then write in, but when I can't, I go find it other ways. So please make that suggestion so I don't have to go beg people next week. And that is it. Maybe next week we'll finally see a review for a movie of some sort.